My dear friends, it's most pleasing to see you. In case we haven't met before, I'm Stephen Clements, a writer, a gamer, and an enjoyer of big brain activities in general. On this channel, I perform dramatic story readings, I provide role-playing game and movie reviews, and I get to talk to interesting people, which is often you in the comments. Remember to like and subscribe. In this episode, I'm going to be doing a dramatic reading from Maidens and Mayhem, Volume 1 of the Man of War series by a dear friend, Marinos Anagnostopoulos. I had the pleasure of editing this work, and I have to say that, in my honest opinion, every one of these stories is a banger. We started off with Monastery of Or before the collection was completed, and after publication we did Horror In Arkaia to give you a little bit different flavor. But now we're going to go to the opening story of the collection, Zaira. And I get the sense that it's this story that most inspired Marino to do a Maidens and Mayhem themed collection. I'm a big fan of it. It even gets its own map. I do hope you enjoy it, and if you do, feel free to buy a copy off Amazon.com or contact him directly for a signed copy, because in addition to loving the stuff and having worked on it, your boy does get a little kickback from that. And this is going to be a two-parter, because Zaira's quite a short story. But let's get started. Zaira, the Falcon. In the land of the lost horizon, where the queen lies dark and cold, and where the stars won't shine, then the story's told. The streets of Terman were filled with roving mobs, their menacing howls drowning out the panicked screams of their victims. Houses were looted, maidens were violated, and blood washed the streets red. Smoke danced gracefully around the soaring minarets and spires, like harem vixens trying to amuse their master, born from the flames that burned the beautiful palaces in the fiery inferno below. Wagons full of treasures were carted out of the ravaged city, followed by beautiful maidens crying tears of sorrow as they were dragged forward by their new lords. The sun was setting behind the crumbling walls, giving the city a final look at its withering life, before the moon rose to illuminate what remained in its ashen grave. Balthazar, the Prince of Mirabar, great Padishah of the Yimsa realms, better known as the Falcon, twirled his mustache in delight as he saw his plans bear fruit. His beautiful white stallion stayed calm beneath his heavy weight as he watched his armies funneling out of the ruined gates of the city with riches and drunken melodies. The Falcon was a mighty warrior that had seen his days of battle and glory. He was built like a bull, like a champion that had battled men and beasts and who had enjoyed sport and the hunt, as well as the thrills of battle. His muscular frame was contradicted by the fat that sagged under his red beard, and his growing belly that also revealed him as a man that enjoyed the simpler pleasures of life, like red meat, sweet wine, and the caressing arms of exotic women. The great Padishah lived as frivolously on campaign as he did in his palace harem, and it showed on his face and his body that was covered in silken regalia. He had acquired his name in honor of all his glorious exploits. Terman burned, and the Falcon smiled. Scores had been settled, and another successful campaign had come to a close. His commanders had gathered around him on their mounts and observed their cataclysmic creation. They were composed of mercenary captains and warlords from all kinds of nations, both civilized and barbarous. They wore an assortment of garments and armors according to their ethnicity and culture. Each commander had his standard bearer beside him, carrying his heraldry and colors. Here was the banner with a crowned boar. There fluttered a flag with a griffin on a red field, and beside it flew an emerald banner with a crying sun. The power and majesty that had crushed Terman was beautifully displayed, as the city's fiery ruin shone light on the gathered warlords and their ensigns. Beside the Falcon was a proud young captain named Casimir. He was one of the younger lieutenants serving the Padishah, but his status was still well respected within the army. He was a prince from a neighboring kingdom that had come to serve beside the Falcon as an ally against the kingdom of Terman. He had fought valiantly, and his exploits were now sung by bards near and far. Casimir wore beautiful gilded plate armor that covered his body. Green, purple, and golden silks lavishly protruded from the chinks in his armor, complete with a lion pelt over his shoulder. On his head he wore a golden spiked helm, with mail flowing down from its edges, curtaining the sides of his head. A thin mustache covered his upper lip, and a well-trimmed beard spiked out of his chin. He was a handsome man full of youth and vigor. His banner fluttered above his head, the golden lion of Ophir on an emerald field. So the once prosperous city of Terman burned, and so the Falcon and its warlords were there to watch it wither and die. The pavilion of the Falcon was enormous. It stood proudly in the center of the camp and towered above the petty tents that sheltered the diverse soldiers of his army. Inside the great tent attested the wealth of its owner. It was adorned by curtains of silk, rich golds, purples, scarlets, and greens decorating the walls. The Falcon's captains lounged on satin cushions as naked slave girls filled their cups with iced wines and were bade to dance and amuse their masters. Lutes, drums, and pipes filled the room with sweet music. The air was heavy with incense, lavish perfumes mixing in with the smells of cooked meats brought in by slaves to satisfy the insatiable palate of the merrymakers. Prince Casimir sat in a place of honor, lounging in front of the throne of the Falcon. He watched as captains came before the great Padishah and prostrated themselves, presenting him with lavish gifts acquired from the sack of the city. A crimson turban covered the Falcon's head, with a peacock feather protruding upwards from the front. He wore the most lavish silks gold could buy. He sat on a throne with two beautiful slave wenches lounging at his feet. One had hair blonde like the glimmer of the golden sun, and one had hair black as a starless night. They lay there in comfort, observing the different champions that approached their master like two curious felines. Beside the blonde sprawled a leopard with a shackle chained around its neck, whose head the Falcon would occasionally caress when he wasn't caressing the heads of the two beauties at his feet. Prince Casimir watched the Falcon enjoying the fruits of his triumph. Beside Casimir sat his cousin Miago, a fearsome warrior with a bald head, a red beard, and giant powerful arms that hung at his side like those of a primate. Miago served as Casimir's right hand and trusted advisor. Turga, the man who sat on the other side of the prince, also had a bald head, but with a black beard. He rested himself on crimson cushions, while slave wenches served him sweet plum wine and teased him gaily. He wore a green vest that was open, exposing the lush hair underneath. Turga, who was from one of the nomadic barbarian tribes and head of Casimir's personal bodyguard, had just a few hours ago been bathed in blood that would have made him unrecognizable in his current jolly state. "I hear there's been trouble," said Miago. "I hear that the Falcon was smitten by a dancing girl, taken as his prize from the Termanian usurper, by Baltos the Black of the Red Spears. I hear there was a debacle, and the Falcon took the girl at sword point. What sorcery did this floozy enchant him with to do something this stupid?" "Perhaps when you see her, she might enchant you," laughed Casimir. "My lord, this will cause friction in the army," responded Miago. "That is all irrelevant now," answered the prince. "The campaign is over. The army will soon be disbanded, and we will go our own ways. Baltus should not get so sensitive over a wench. We each presented the Padishah with gifts. If it wasn't for him, most of these men wouldn't have a full belly or a full purse. Man o' wars don't know how to appreciate certain things." "I heard Baltus and his men have fled the camp," said Turga. "I never knew why, but now the riddle's been answered." "Petty," said the prince, stroking his soft beard. Across from the Ortherians, a company of man-o'-wars from distant Arkaia, known as the Steel Panthers, amused themselves with food, women, and wine. They were, for the most part, clean-shaven and wore their dark hair long down to their shoulders. Their skin was bronzed by the sun to a tawny color, and they looked like an entourage of dandies dressed in sapphire robes, drinking their wine greedily. Their leader was a man named Mandros. A black turban covered his head, and a great panther pelt hung over his shoulder. He sat in the middle, accompanied by a Kalkajir, one from the dwarven race, dressed in a fluffy outfit of red and yellow, and sporting two blue slippers with curled ends. He had a giant gold-white beard split in two and tied on each end, with a pig-like nose that seemed to have been pushed in. His skin was dark, perfumed, and sweaty. He was crowned by a giant blue turban that fitted like a giant onion on his stunted frame. The Kalkajir looked ridiculous. He knew it, and he didn't care. He and Mandros were watching a barbarian wench toying around with a tied-up Termanian nobleman. She was beating the fat man and pouring wine all over his agonized, plump face. The barbarian was beautiful with skin that was sun-kissed, but with visible tan lines revealing her original snow-white color. Her hair was black as darkness, and her eyes were metallic silver that glittered like ice and burned like fire. They expressed a primitive hate and rage that would make a civilized man quiver, and the nobleman was quivering. She pulled out a dagger and cut the man across the fat of his face. He screamed in agony. She then used it to cut off one of his fingers. "You dog!" she spat in drunken fury. "Did you think you would make me your slave and use me as your plaything?" She cut off another finger. Generous amounts of blood squirted out of the wound, ruining the colorfully embellished rugs underneath. The surrounding crowd fell silent and watched the grisly show. "Mercy!" the fat man screamed. "Mercy?" she asked him, ripping off the man's trousers and swinging her dagger around, terrifying the nobleman for what she might do. "Mercy like you were going to give me, you worm?" Mandros grabbed her hand and looked sternly into her eyes. He took the dagger from her hand, pulled back the man's head, and slit his throat. The nobleman bled out the remainder of his life in agony. "I'll pay for your rugs," Mandros addressed the great Padishah as he tossed the bloody dagger. The room broke out in laughter. Everyone laughed save the barbarian woman, who gawked at Mandros in anger as if he had stolen her prize. "That was enough," he told her. "Your honor has been avenged by me. Now sit down and enjoy the party." She harumphed at him and waved for a slave to bring her wine. Casimir raised his chalice to Mandros. Mandros raised his drinking vessel back. "Those Archaeans are strange folk," said Miago. "I've come to fancy them," responded Turga, as a slave fed him a grape. "The wench has got quite the story. I've been drinking a lot with Mandros this campaign, and he told me she was that nobleman's slave. Her name is Thuvia. She hails from the icy north. The nobleman had bought her fresh and was going to use her one night, but she hit him in the head with a wine vessel, slew some of his bodyguards, and escaped. She came upon a drunken Mandros at a tavern, who decided he wanted her for the night. As they left the tavern, a group of the usurper's guard tried to steal her from him after a night of revelry, and all hell broke loose. Mandros slew a few of them, and the ones that got away reported his crimes. Mandros, too drunk and beat up to perform, passed out, and the wench escaped while he slept. Gods know she would have cut his throat if he had tried anything. He woke up to a hangover, no woman, and guards coming through his door to arrest him. The wench found out and had a change of heart. She went and found the dwarf man that she had met with Mandros at the tavern. His name is Ulni, by the way. They got the Archaea man-o-wars together and rescued Mandros from Turman's snake pit. Mandros then took his men and switched sides, joining the Falcon to have his revenge. "Just imagine," said Prince Casimir, "if it wasn't for those lascivious guards, they would have fought for Turman. They would probably be dead by now." "Funny how things work out," said Miago. "The gods smile on people in funny ways," exclaimed Casimir. "We'll send them gifts tonight. If the gods have given them their favor, then we must comply as well." "A wise move, my lord," said Turga as he munched on a grape. "I believe I will go. Enjoy the company for now." A trumpet blasted, and the music stopped, interrupting Turga's drinking plans. Everyone fell silent. The Falcon stood up from his throne to address his guests. "My lords," he said in a deep, commanding voice, "we have brought down Turman!" Loud, deafening cheers broke out in the tent. Once the crowd grew silent, the Falcon continued, "Glory has been heaped upon your names, and gold has filled your purses. Our enemies' women are yours to do with as you please. We have marched far and have won many battles together. We have struggled, we have bled, and we have been rewarded. I have led you to this victory." More cheers erupted in the room. The Falcon signaled for quiet. "My splendid lords, soon we will part ways, and you will return to your lands with tales of valor and glory. Your names will be written in the scrolls of history. Tonight we celebrate. My dear lords, I would like to raise my cup and make a toast to you." The guests roared in unison as they raised their drinking vessels and toasted the Falcon and each other. "I would like to present to you now my most beloved prize. This is my gift to all of you. She is the most beautiful creature man has ever laid eyes upon. Now your eyes will feast on her beauty. Gentlemen, this is Zaira." There was a puff of lavender smoke before the throne of the Falcon. The surrounding guests and slaves broke the silence with their coughing. The smoke cleared, and before them stood the most beautiful woman Prince Casimir had ever seen. Her hair was onyx, and it was crowned by a golden tiara encrusted with sparkling rubies. Her dark, tawny skin was natural and exotic. Her eyes were like two dark pots of honey that hypnotized the men that stared at this alluring creature. Her ample breasts were cupped by two golden braces. She wore a diamond-encrusted girdle from which hung a long purple cloth flowing down to her feet that covered her groin. This must be the woman the Falcon stole from Baltas. Casimir stared in disbelief as all sane thoughts abandoned his head. Zaira raised her hands high above her head. Drums began to play as she began to swing her hips from west to east and east to west, conquering the eyes of all the mighty men who watched. She continued to dance. She danced like the fires that had consumed the palaces of Turman. She spun like a cyclone of destruction, like an artistry of nature that a sailor admires from afar before it brings his coming doom. She leapt like a tigress, proud and beautiful through the air, descending on her astonished prey. The guests clapped to her rhythm as it grew faster and wilder. Casimir was hypnotized. The falcon looked at him and scowled with jealousy. "She must be mine," whispered the Ophirian prince. "Have you gone mad?" asked Miago in astonished terror. "You will bring doom to us all." "She must be mine," responded the prince in a louder tone as he watched, hypnotized by her frame. "I must have her." The falcon stared at him in rage, as if he could hear everything he was saying. Zaira shot short glances towards Casimir as she spun. The prince could barely contain himself as Miago began to panic, and Turga began to notice there was something amiss. Zaira shot another quick glance at Casimir and winked at him. His heart began to beat faster as he became lost in her dark, hazel eyes. "She must be mine," Casimir said again, now loudly so that Turga heard him. They could not tell if the falcon had heard, but at that moment the Padishah stood up in rage. His face turned glowing red to match his perfectly groomed beard. That's when the music stopped. The dance of Zaira finished as she collapsed into a bow before her audience. Balthazar, great Padishah of the Yimza realms, and Prince Casimir of Ophir stared at each other in fury. A silence enveloped the tent. The surrounding people looked at them, expecting some kind of feud to erupt while not knowing what brought the two men to conflict. The silence was suddenly broken from the most unexpected person. "Floozy of the Abyss!" a drunken Thuvia yelled at the dancer, breaking the hypnotic gaze that Mandros was giving Zaira's performance. Mandros snapped out of his hypnotic state, and the whole tent erupted in laughter. He realized what the barbarian's problem was. She was jealous of him watching the dancer. Thuvia stood there in rage and embarrassment. The drunken Mandros grabbed her by the waist, swung her around, and kissed her aggressively on the lips. She shoved him away and slapped him hard across the face. The crowd gave a big cry of astonishment as they watched the show. Mandros looked her in the eyes and smiled arrogantly. The barbarian broke, and as Mandros kissed her again, this time she responded by kissing him back as passionately as Zaira had danced. The tent erupted in cheers, and everyone that had noticed the erupting feud forgot about the angry falcon and the insolent Ophirian prince. Zaira gave a look of desperation towards Prince Casimir as she was led away. The festivities concluded, the revelers stumbled back to their tents to enjoy the embrace of a slave girl that they had acquired or a heavy sleep before they faced the morning hangover. In Casimir's tent, there was no sleep or lovemaking. In Casimir's tent, there were swift words and panic. "We must rouse the men and break away from the camp," snorted Miago. The falcon is hot-tempered and ruthless. He does not take insults well, and his vengeance is swift. "What were you thinking?" laughed Turga drunkenly. "This wench has truly bewitched you, hasn't she?" Casimir gave Turga a look of wrath, but was quickly interrupted by Miago. "This is no laughing matter," he said. "Our lives hang on a string. We must break camp now, and then hope the falcon forgets about us and my cousin's insolence." "My insolence?" asked Casimir in hot anger. "He mocks us with his slave. He steals her from one of his loyal servants and makes her dance before the rest of us. The falcon is a dog." "A dog that has made you rich," answered Miago. "He is also a dog that can destroy you." "Miago is right," broke in Turga. "You must go and make your peace with him, or we should gather the men now and make a break for it. You have no other options, lad." Prince Casimir stood there in thought. He looked at his two companions and noticed the uneasiness in their eyes. With a sigh, he gave them an answer. "You're both right. The drink must have gotten to my head. Prepare some gifts from our treasure. I'll take it to him now and apologize. He was always good to me, and this is no way to repay his generosity." "A wise choice," answered Miago. "Let me prepare, and I'll come with you." "No," said Casimir. "I must go and face him alone, man to man. He respects courage, manly virtue. I must display both without the help of my companions. I'll be off when the treasure's ready." And so with a setup like that, we end part 1 of Zaira. Hopefully, this has enticed you to come back for the sword and sorcery debauchery. That is the only thing that can happen in response to a build-up like that. 2 bucking warlords with eyes on the same whore. Oh yeah, it's going to be some good stuff, I promise you. Spoiler, I read it. I know it's good stuff. So what did you think about the first installment of Zaira? Please drop your thoughts in the comments. I appreciate them. I like reading them, and I respond to all of them. And don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you liked it, you can always pick up a copy of it, because we need people putting out good stuff. I got to support them. So my dear friends, that's all I got for you for now. But come back for part 2 of Zaira, and we're going to see it hit the fan. So as we part for now, my dear friends, I wish you nothing but the best.
Thank you.